What's up, guys? You're listening to another episode of Selling on Amazon with Andy Isom. Guys, we have hit 1 million podcast episode downloads. I'm going to mix it up for you guys today on the podcast, and I'm actually going to share my podcasting tips and tactics. So for any of you guys listening that maybe have ambitions about, starting your own podcast, or maybe you're just curious to learn more a little bit about how I do my podcast and maybe some stats, some numbers, results, some strategies, marketing strategies, things that have worked for me to help me get this podcast consistently in the top 100 entrepreneurship podcasts in the United States. So let me share with you guys right here on screen, actually. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. Just another quick shout out, guys. I am posting these podcast episodes on YouTube. So whenever I'm doing screen share type of content, you'll be able to see that. So you can see right here, this is legitimate. I'm scrolling on my screen. A lot of people are like, Andy, you're fake. Those are fake numbers. You don't really have 1 million downloads. There you go, right there. As of recording this episode, which obviously I try to record a little in advance, so this number will be higher when you guys actually listen to this or see this video. But I have 1,021,463 downloads. And if we're looking at some smaller metrics, this week I have 3,900 downloads. This month I have 8,632. Now keep in mind, this is as of Wednesday, November 8th. So we're just a few days into the month. Let's kind of break down here. I'm going to scroll down further here. I'm in Libsyn, which is what I use to host my podcast. You can kind of see what daily podcast episode downloads look like. So for like peak times, peak episodes, I'll hit 2,193, like anywhere around 2,000. The last couple weeks, we've been down a little bit. We're looking at about 1,700, 1,500, 1,700 downloads per day. And I see the biggest spike on Mondays and then a lower spike on Wednesdays. It's really crazy how this works, like how predictable these little spikes are. Let me try to make this little date range longer and you can see bigger versions of the spike. Yeah, so it'll be like a big spike on Monday, drop down, another big spike on Wednesday, and then it tails off for the rest of the week, and then it spikes up again. So every time a new episode comes out, spikes, drops down, spikes again, tails off the end of the week. Out of curiosity, let's see so far what the most downloaded episode is. Let me actually go here to my episode totals and see if I can sort this. Okay, the most downloaded episode of all time is episode number 2. Average ideas with great execution beat great ideas with average execution. That has been downloaded 45,938 times. That's a lot of episode downloads. And the first, let's see, looks like it goes episode 2, 1, 3, 4. Those are all over 26,000 downloads. And then it drops off pretty quick after there. 18,000, 15, 13, 13, 11, 6. So it goes on after that. So what happens with a lot of people, this is the way that they listen to podcasts. And a big reason why is by default, a lot of podcasting apps will show the episodes like in the app in order of oldest to newest. So when someone opens up the show or clicks on my show, the first episode they see listed there is episode number 1. You can edit this in your podcast app. I know an Apple Podcast, which is what I use to listen, I'll switch it so I see most recent episodes first there on the list. But I do know that there are apps that by default, they'll show the oldest. So what happens to a lot of people is they may download a free piece of content that I've put out there, a play sheet, an email, something they saw, and they're like, oh, Andy has a podcast. Or they just search it, right? They're searching Amazon on a podcast app, they find it, and they see the first episode. So they start listening to the first episode, and they may listen to the first 1, 2, first few, and figure out, what, is this legit? Do I want to keep going with this or, find something else or give up? So that's why there's a lot of listeners right there on those first ones, and then it drops off pretty quick because a lot of people will listen for a sec and figure out, not interested in this guy, not interested in this business, not in, whatever reason they're not interested. So let me throw out a big tip for you guys. And this is something I didn't really realize. I had no idea that my first episodes would get 40,000 downloads and then it would trail off from there, where every episode now gets maybe a couple thousand downloads, 2,000 to 5,000 downloads probably. My big tip is when you start your podcast, if you're going to start your own show, keep in mind that those very first episodes are going to live on for a long time. I recorded those first episodes, those first 8 episodes. I think it's been 3 years now since I recorded those, and people still listen to those. In fact, I still get messages almost weekly from people saying, Andy, I listened to your podcast. Are those first 8 episodes episodes still relevant today? And this is 3 years later. So I'm like, wow, people still listen to those old episodes. So if you're starting a show and you're thinking about, what do I want my first episodes to be about? Or what do I want them to sound like? Or how do I want them to be? Understand those are going to be very, very critical for the longevity, the success of your podcast show into the future, because a lot of people are going to land on those first few episodes and make judgments on whether or not they want to keep listening or scroll through some of your newer episodes and stick around, subscribe, leave reviews. Now, here's what's tough. Your first episodes, most likely, guys, if you've never had a podcast before, they're not going to be that great. This is a learning process. Speaking into a microphone, learning how to record, learning how to edit, figuring out your cadence, your tone of voice. This is a learning process. If you were to go back right now, like we're on what episode is this? This is episode 297. If you're to listen to this episode right here, right now, and then after this episode, go back, scroll down and find my first episode ever and listen to it. I'm going to sound very different. Not just the audio quality, and I'll talk about that. I want to talk about that in the episode today too, but I'm more talking about the tone of voice, the cadence, the enthusiasm, I guess we could say, in my actual speaking voice. It's very different because when you've never podcasted before and you haven't listened to yourself and you're not picking up on cues on like, what do I sound like? How can I improve? What is interesting? What tones, what changes, what pauses or speed up, slow down. You're not aware of that. So your first episodes, you'll record it and you might listen to it and be like, this sounds pretty good. But 300 episodes later, you're going to go back to it and be like, oh my gosh, this is so cringy. I do this all the time. And I've been posting YouTube videos long before I ever started talking to you guys about Amazon on this podcast. Way back in 2017, I was doing YouTube videos and it's the same thing. I'll go back and just for funsies, click on old videos that I made and watch myself or listen to myself and think, whoa, that is uber cringe. I can't believe anyone actually watched these videos back then. But at the time, I didn't know at the time you didn't know any better because that's just the way you were. And honestly, that's maybe how you were in real life. Like when you had conversations, that's what you sound like. So I'm like, oh my gosh, is that really how I sound like when I talk to strangers? I think I'm different now. I think after recording 300 podcast episodes, think about it, 20, 30 minutes of talking times 300. I've done this 300 times. I would like to think it has bled over to my day-to-day life. In fact, I find myself, sometimes I speak in church. So in my local church, I'm asked to get up and talk in church or teach lessons at church. And I notice myself talking in the microphone at church with a similar tone and cadence that I'm recording a podcast episode. And in fact, I'll joke with people, be like, wow, this is crazy. I feel like I'm recording a podcast episode up here. So it's going to bleed over into your normal speaking, conversational talking, I guess, style, the more that you do podcasts, right? The more that you record content, whether it's video or podcast, I guess it doesn't really matter. But to wrap that point up, remember your first episodes are going to be very critical in the future of your podcast. So I don't want to put pressure on you, but try to do the best that you can. And I would say be very diligent in deciding what those first few episodes are going to be about. I don't suggest if you're going to start a podcast show that like, oh, your first, 5 episodes are just random, whatever. I think a big reason too, why my podcast has done so well related to Amazon is I was very clear that those first 8 episodes were like a series. Like, hey, I'm going to take you in 8 episodes through the entire process of selling on Amazon. And so it was a very step-by-step approach, clear expectations on what was going to be delivered in the episodes. And I just got right to it. So again, I would maybe plan out like your first 5 episodes as maybe like a little series about a very, very important topic that's going to set the tone for the rest of your show. And I had the big worry after I recorded my first 8 episodes, I had the big worry of, I don't know what else I'm going to talk about because I laid it all out there. For those of you that have been around for 3 years now, or maybe you have already listened to my first 8 episodes, I pretty much lay out the whole blueprint in 8 episodes. Obviously, there's a ton of details that you can't explain in just 8 episodes, hence why we're 300 episodes later. But at the time, I was like, man, I don't know what else I'm going to talk about. I literally feel like I just told everyone everything. And I actually stopped recording. After those 8 episodes, I stopped for about 4 or 5 months because I was like, what else could I possibly talk about? I just told everyone everything. And then as more messages came in and questions came in and things, I'm like, oh, there's a lot more I could actually cover. And the crazy thing is on this journey, we're approaching 300 episodes. I've still had that thought almost weekly where I'm like, gosh, I don't know what else I'm going to talk about. And then another 50 or 100 episodes goes by and I hit, 100 episodes, 200, now approaching 300. I'm like, holy cow, I cannot believe I'm still going. I cannot believe there's still things to talk about related to running your brand on Amazon. Yet here we are. So that's again, what's kind of crazy is don't worry too much about niching down and being concerned like, oh, if I niche down too far, I'm not going to have anything to talk about. That's another big fear because people ask me about podcasting kind of on the side, right? They're like, Andy, I know you have a podcast and it's done well. Thinking about podcasting, what are your tips? And I say, focus on a niche because everyone has like the broad ambitions of like, oh, I want to talk about money. I want to talk about business. I want to talk about relationships, like, the big three that people spend money on so that they can sell, programs, courses or whatever. So that's what everyone thinks like, oh, I'm like, what's your business? Or excuse me, what's your podcast about? It's going to be about business. And I'm like, why would if it's just about business, why would anyone listen to you? Especially when you're just starting out. You're a brand new podcast. You're trying to get some momentum. You're trying to get listeners and your topic is business. What credibility do you have? If you're going to be a business podcast, you're going up against the biggest names in the world. The biggest names in the world. No one is going to want to listen to you when they have the option of listening to very established people in the business world that are, household names. Right? The Tim Ferrisses of the world. You've got, I'm trying to think now off the top of my head. We could say like Tim Ferriss, Russell Brunson. I mean, in, marketing, I probably honestly should pull it up. Alex Hormozy, that's who I listen to. Gary Vaynerchuk, Pat Flynn, Amy Porterfield. These are just ones I'm just thinking off the top of my head that I know are in my podcast app. These are big name people in the business world. And there's tons of others. Business entrepreneurship podcasts are massive. And that's why so many people struggle when they launch their podcast and they give up and they do 10 episodes and like, didn't really get any listeners. I didn't make any money. I'm giving up. It's because it's like you were too broad. You went way too broad. You have no credibility to be going after an audience that big. You need to focus in, narrow down on a very, very specific niche, and you can grow from there. Alex Hormozy, Let's Talk Podcast. I was just listening to his podcast today, literally at the gym, and he gives the example of in just business in general. I was listening to his episode from his ebook, $100 Million Leads, talking about local businesses. If you're a local business and you want to run ads or get leads, start in your little pond. Start in your small little teeny market, your neighborhood around your business, and then dominate that. Then expand into your little lake and cover your city. Then you can expand into your ocean, maybe cover your state or whatever, and have different offerings that you could fulfill to a bigger audience. But you have to dominate your small niche first if you ever want to have a chance at the bigger ocean, the bigger piece of the pie in your market. And that's something that I've seen too. Like, guys, my podcast is called Selling on Amazon with Andy Isom. It's very to the point. Like, what is my podcast about? It's about selling on Amazon. Now, do I talk about other stuff? Yes, I do. Like, I'm talking about podcasting right now. I have a lot of episodes talking about mindset, talking about business, talking about finances. I have episodes that are talking not about Amazon specific stuff. So you can still talk about stuff in your broader niche, even though your podcast is specifically focused on, in my case, selling on Amazon. That's why I think my podcast has grown and done so well is I dominated my niche. I went in and I said, okay, what are all the Amazon podcasts out there? And I actually had previous podcasting experience. I actually had a show before this one called Learn How, where I did almost 50 episodes about business in that general businessy world. And it never really gained that much momentum. But at least I kind of knew how podcasting worked. And so I said, okay, I know how to podcast. I've done it before. Let me do one about Amazon. I went and looked and saw like, what are the other podcasts out there? I clicked on every single one. I listened to episodes. I saw how frequently they were putting out content. I read reviews and I just figured out this is what I need to do to make the best Amazon podcast in the world. And I just went out and did it. Like I just went out and I outworked every other Amazon podcast out there. I put out more episodes than anyone else was putting out. I put out better content than anyone else was putting out. I put out better quality, better audio quality, better editing than anyone else was putting out. And I just dominated the Amazon FBA podcasting space. And then I'm able to grow from there, right? And reach new audiences in the entrepreneurship, business, marketing world simply because I've been able to build that reputation in the Amazon space. So that's what I'd recommend doing. Like if you're like, I want to go after relationships or I want to go after, what was the other one I said? Like money, finances, niche down, focus on a very, very specific avatar that will be willing to listen to you even if you don't have that much credibility. Like if you want to start a relationship podcast and you're not some PhD that has a New York Times best-selling book about relationships, you need to focus in on something very, very specific. Like if you're an older couple and maybe you've been married for 40 years happily and have kids and you're not divorced, right? And things are overall pretty dang good for you, then have a podcast focusing in on that specific audience, a very specific audience that resonates with, so that when, your show comes up or whatever, someone who is in that exact scenario says, oh my gosh, that's for me. Like, here's one that just came to mind. A podcast specific, like parenting. Let's go parenting. Like I have a parenting podcast. I share parenting tips. Great. Go more specific. Maybe you have 3 boys, no girls. You have no girls. You have 3 boys. Like me, I have 2 boys. A podcast, like let's say I was going to do this. I'm a guy. I have 2 sons, little sons, right? A 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. I'm going to start a podcast for dads, for young dads in their 30s, how to be a great father for young toddler and baby aged boys. Now you see, if someone out there is like, I'm a dad, I have young boys, I'm in my 30s, maybe they're working a lot, they're finding it hard to find balance, they're not resonating with their kids or whatever, they're struggling, things are rough at home, maybe they're having conflicts with their spouse. When they stumble upon my podcast, that's going to immediately resonate with them. Instead of just like general parenting advice, it's, oh my gosh, I'm a 30-year-old. I have only boys. I'm struggling with this. Here's a guy who has only boys who's crushing it. Let me hear what he has to say. And then guess what? As your podcast grows, you can talk about other stuff. You don't just have to talk about parenting young boys. It can evolve. It can grow from there. But that's how you gain market share, I guess we could call it, in the podcasting world. Let's talk quickly about some equipment, shall we? Just for funsies. When I first started my podcast, I'm trying to think back on actually how I recorded those first initial episodes, what microphone I was using at the time. I think I remember. At the time, quick pause, let me actually grab it. I think I have it on my shelf right here behind me. Let me grab it. I'm fairly certain those first 8 episodes were recorded on my Zoom H4n Pro. This is a recording device. It has a little built-in slot right here on the side for an SD card. And these funky looking Star Wars looking things at the top are actually microphones. So, and there's a little mount here. So I could honestly just screw this into like my microphone right here. I could twist this, screw this on, and just talk directly into this microphone. I actually have like a foam cover for it, like a pop filter for this too. And I'm fairly certain that's what I did. This is a really awesome device. Guys, this is a really awesome device. It's really awesome for out in the field. You want to do interviews, like out at places. Great device to have. Again, Zoom H4n Pro. You can message me and I can drop you a link for it. But I think that thing will cost you, I'm trying to remember. I honestly have no idea. I'm just throwing this out there, but I think it was like $150 maybe. Gosh, I could be way off on that, but I want to say it was maybe around there. So yeah, really cool device, portable. You can use batteries. You can use like an adapter to plug it in while you're recording, and just a little SD card. I'm pretty sure that's what I used. Now, as of now, my setup is very different. Now I use Adobe Audition. So I record directly into the software called Adobe Audition. I have a whole bunch of different plugins, filters, effects. That's the word I'm looking for. Effects that I use to make my voice sound crispy and buttery like it is. I'm going to do this. Let me pause for 1 second, and I'm actually going to share with you what this audio sounds like straight out of this microphone. This audio that you're hearing right now is the native default audio straight from this microphone with no effects. This is the audio from the microphone after I add on all the effects in Adobe Audition, equalizing, compression, other filters to make the voice sound a lot better for listening or watching on YouTube. So you can see how big of a difference and improvement just a few little editing tweaks and things can make to your show. And this is one of the biggest mistakes that new podcasters make. They just record into an iPhone or even like a Zoom H4n or even a fancy mic, but they do no editing. They don't use any effects. They don't do compression, equalization, any of that. So their voice sounds just kind of bleh. Instead of having those nice, rich, deep tones and those crispy high tones that sound like what I like to use, it sounds like I'm talking on XM radio. It sounds like you're listening to, a host on your favorite Sirius XM radio show. So I could say, What's up, guys? You're listening to U92, and the audio quality sounds like the radio. So it sounds good. It sounds like what you expect it to sound like. So again, please, if you're going to start a podcast, put some effort, put some investment into your equipment and software. Adobe Audition, it comes with the Adobe Suite. I think you can buy it as a standalone, but it's like a monthly subscription. I pay for the full Adobe Suite. I think it's like $50 a month, but I get Photoshop, Premiere, Audition, all the different Adobe Acrobat, all the tools. But I think again, you can pay less just to get, maybe if you just want Adobe Audition. But yeah, all those effects that I use, by the way, are all free ones. They come with the program. I'm not like paying extra for any of these effects to make the voice sound the way it is. The microphone that I'm using is the Shure SM7B. Shure SM7B. It's about a $400 microphone. Amazing for podcasting. In my opinion, for the price, there's some nicer ones that are roughly $1,000, but for the price, by far the best microphone for podcasting on the market. You're gonna need microphone cables. The microphone holder that I use is called Blue. You can't really see it super well. In fact, actually, let's do this. I can pop the camera here really quick. Let me pop the camera. I'll show it to you guys. Sorry for my messy office, but this is the microphone arm stand. There's the name right there. It's called Blue. The cool thing about this stand is it stays wherever I move it. So if I move it to a specific spot, it stays. So I can move it away, stays, move it close to my mouth, stays. So that is again, the Blue mic stand. That's about $130. Shure SM7B, $400. You're gonna need some cables. You're also going to need what's called a cloud lifter. That just raises the dB and you run the cloud lifter into your audio interface. I'm using the Scarlett Focusrite, and that's just, again, it's called an audio interface. It's what you use to plug these microphone cables into your computer, because that is a little USB that goes into my computer, but the mic cable goes into that. It's called an audio interface. So full setup, guys, like hardware. We're not talking Adobe Audition, hardware for my podcast setup. I guess I've got my camera too. So I'm using the Sony a6400 to record video for my podcast. It's the same camera I use on my Zoom calls. So if you've ever been on a Zoom call with me, this is the camera that you're watching that content on. It's a nice little compact. It's got the little flip screen so I can see myself, make sure I'm framed good. That's the Sony a6400. I've had that bad boy for years. I love it. Let's not talk camera. Let's just talk audio. If you're like, Andy, I just want to do audio. We're looking at about $400 mic, $100 arm, $50 cable. Cloud lifter is another about $100, and the audio interface maybe like $200. You're looking at, for less than $1,000, maybe, I don't know, $700, $800 or so to get like the best setup. And then you're paying Adobe Audition every month. Oh, Libsyn, the software that I use to host my podcast, which automatically puts it out there on all the different apps. A lot of people ask, Andy, how do you get a podcast on Apple and Spotify and Audible and all the different platforms out there? You just put it on Libsyn, and Libsyn does the rest. It's super easy. You pay monthly depending on how many episodes you upload. For the amount of episodes I upload and the length of my episodes, or the megabytes, because if you upload a higher quality file, it's going to be more file size, more space. I think I pay like $30 a month for Libsyn. But it can go all the way down to like $10 a month if you're doing like once a week and your episodes are shorter. So yeah, guys, that's really it. That's the beauty of podcasting, is it's not that expensive. And especially if you're not doing video, it's about one-time investment in all the gear, a couple monthly subscriptions for the software needed to host it, and then editing. Like, you can edit podcasts yourself. You can pay other people to edit them for you. I actually have an editor. Shout out Javi, who edits all my podcast episodes. But yeah, it's not that hard to edit podcast episodes. You can figure it out pretty quick doing some YouTube tutorials. But if you just like don't have the time or don't want to deal with it, there's plenty of people out there that will edit podcast episodes for you. But yeah, this was kind of a fun little different episode to talk specifically about podcasting. I know this isn't an Amazon episode, and I know you guys are like, Andy, we just want your Amazon content. But I don't know. I love talking about podcasting as well. Obviously, it's a huge part of my personal brand. So if any of you guys are interested in, starting your own podcast and have questions about it, just go hit me up on Instagram. That's probably the best way to get a response from me. I'm happy to share with you guys some more information or, advice for you guys who are looking to get into podcasting. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. Once again, you're listening to Selling on Amazon with Andy Isom. We'll see you in the next episode.